Today's lesson is lesson 1.2.2, and this is part 1, creating inequalities in one variable. Our objective by the end of lesson 1.2.2 is that students will be able to solve linear inequalities with one variable. So let's start this out with some vocabulary. Our first word is inequality. And an inequality is a mathematical sentence with an infinite amount of solutions. And inequalities are things that you have definitely used in the past. Let's kind of go through and refresh and review what the different inequalities are and the different symbols. So first symbol we have is greater than. And when we're using inequalities to describe solutions, we would have something like x is greater than 3. So that means that my x value could be any number that is larger than 3. Next we have less than. And an example of a solution with using a less than is x is less than 7, meaning that x could be any value that is less than 7. Our third one is greater than or equal to. So this is similar to the greater than symbol. The only difference is that it has one little line underneath it, meaning it could also be equal to. So an example is x is greater than or equal to -4, which means that x could be any number from -4 and up. Finally is less than or equal to. And that is the opposite. So if we have x is less than or equal to 9, that means x could be 9 or any values less. So it could be 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, all the way to -infinity. We actually do have one more symbol, and let's redo that. This means not equal to. So I could say something like x is not equal to 1. So it could be any number from -infinity to +infinity except for 1. Let's move on to an example of solving linear inequalities. So solving linear inequalities is very, very similar to solving a linear equation, except there's just this one thing that we have to remember. And that is that the inequality symbol will flip if you multiply or divide by a negative number. You might be wondering why that's the case, and we will take a look at the number line to explain why that happens. Okay, so let's say I've got my number line and we are looking at the number 2 and 5. So we've got 2 and, whoops, kind of missed that, 5. So 2, as you know, is less than 5. Well, what if I decide to multiply both sides of my equation by -1? I know that a negative times a negative is a negative times a positive is a negative. So this is going to become -2 and -5. Well, let's look at another number line. We now have -2 and -5. -5 is over here. -2 is over here. -2 is actually greater than -5. So anytime you multiply or divide both sides of an inequality by a negative number, it's going to cause the value to flip, which means that the larger number is now going to have a smaller value. And the smaller value will now have a larger value. So let's take this one exception and go on and actually solve a linear inequality. The steps for solving inequalities are almost the same as solving a linear equation. So step 1, we are going to distribute so we can get rid of the parentheses. So let's say I'm starting out with -2 times the quantity of x minus 1 plus 4 is greater than 18. I'm supposed to distribute, so I'm going to do -2 times x is -2x, and -2 times -1 is +1, because a negative times a negative equals a positive. Let's bring everything else down. Plus 4 is greater than 18. Step 2 is combine like terms. So in this example, I see that on the left side of my inequality, I have 1 and 4. Those are like terms. So let's bring down -2x. 1 plus 4 is 5, and that's greater than 18. Next, we're going to move on to step 3, which is to add or subtract. The goal of adding or subtracting is to get our constant to the other side of the equation. So I see that my constant is this 5 right over here. I want to get rid of it and move it, so I subtract 5. 5 minus 5 is 0. And what I have left is -2x is greater than 13. And finally, I need to multiply or divide. So I need to break apart that -2 and the x, so I'm going to divide by -2. Now, remember, we said that the inequality symbol will flip if you multiply or divide by a negative. I am dividing both sides of the equation by a negative, so that means my symbol is going to flip. -2 divided by -2 will cancel, so I will have an x left over. My symbol is going to flip because I was dividing by a negative, and then -13 divided by -2 is -7.5. So don't forget to flip this sign. Now I just realized that I made a mistake, and I'm going to keep my mistake here because I want you guys to go back and see if you can find it. I did the right steps, I just did an error in my multiplying or dividing, adding or subtracting. So I want you to see if you can find it, and if you do find the mistake, I want you to write down what my mistake was in the comment section of this assignment, and you will get extra credit for finding out what my mistake was. Make sure you are careful when you are doing your simple algebraic operations, when you're adding, subtracting, multiplying, and dividing, because it is very, very easy to make mistakes, even for me. So please make sure you are not making mistakes as well. Let's go ahead and do one more example. This example is 2 times the quantity of 2x plus 3 is less than 6. So step 1 is to get rid of the parentheses, and we do that by distributing. 2 times 2x is 4x. 2 times 3 is 6. Bring our less than, and bring down 6. Step number 2 was to combine like terms. I noticed that I have 4x and I have 6, and neither of those are like terms, so I actually can't even do step 2. It's time to move on to step 3. Step 3 is to add or subtract, get rid of our constant. So I have to subtract 6. The goal is to cancel it out on the left side. 6 minus 6 is nothing. And then on the right side, we have 0 left over. Now don't freak out, we can have a 0. Sometimes we see a 0 and we think I must have made a mistake. It's okay. I promise I didn't make a mistake this time. Next, I want to split up 4 and x, so I do that by dividing both sides by 4. 4 divided by 4 is canceled out, and I'm left with x is less than 0 divided by 4 is 0. So that means x could be any number that is less than 0, or in other words, it could be any negative number. Alright, don't forget I made a mathematical mistake on that last example. If you want extra credit for finding my mistake, make sure you write down what that mistake was in this comment section. And don't forget to take your quiz at the end of this lesson.